if you wanted to look at the slides, if you find that they're a little bit too small up here and you want to look at them, I already have them on the website. So if you go to the website and go to the course, you'll see lesson 9 has the slides there, and you can download the PDF. It's a pain trying to fit all this stuff on. I was trying to make it look pretty and fit, which resulted in small stuff. This is why I want a super high def projector.
I'll put the good one out.
Yeah. So this is the penultimate lesson of the story of the church. You guys might find it hard to see from over there, but you can figure it out. And we're looking at the story of the church, the way that the church has wrestled with the truth, and the way that that has led to, over time, a wide range, a diverse range of expressions of the church, which are often called denominations, but not always. That's actually a fairly recent term. And so I thought first, come on. It was working before, now it's not working. Always the way.
It's all right.
Yeah, it's always the way. Let's try that. Okay. So I thought it was important, because we're talking about denominations which can be contentious. It's certainly a matter of differences. So it'd be helpful for you to know where I come from, what my background is, because that will give you an idea of my biases. So my background, I was born a Methodist. My dad was a minister, and when he was a minister up until I was 4 years old. The Methodists are an Arminian group. That means they believe in human free will, and human free will exists in tension with God's sovereign will. They're an evangelical movement. Their government is semi-hierarchical. They have a sort of hierarchical government with some level of autonomy for the churches, for the individual churches. They're a movement that came out of Anglicanism, and they're a response to the pietistic movement, Moravian influences primarily. We'll get up to that. This is all stuff that you'll learn.
It's interesting, Malcolm, because all of those things are things which are between 500 and 100 years ago. None of them necessarily fit how Methodism is now sort of evolving.
No, modern Methodism is nothing like this. At the time, when I was a child, Methodism was more or less this.
Yep.
Social justice was important, thus the Blue Nurses, Wesley Hospital, Wesley Missions, etc. They're all Methodist things.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Is that what pietistic means?
Pietistic means if you're pious, you're faithful, right? So pietistic is faith in action, basically. It's a movement which we'll find in history later. It's towards the end, because it's the 18th century, I think, and it's a response to the hardening and coldness of the Protestant church over time. In response to that, there was a movement that said we've got to take our faith seriously and live it out.
Okay.
And 100 years after that initial movement, there was sort of another one with a group called the Moravians, and they influenced the Methodists, who were an English branch of it. And Methodism was extremely influential in America with the great evangelists of John Wesley and George Whitefield. And things like so the practical expression of your faith in your life is a part of Methodism. So teetotaling attitude. And when my parents were kids, not dancing, not going to the movies, not gambling, that sort of stuff. By the time I was a kid, you were allowed to play cards, but
When
No
we
dancing,
allowed to
no?
start dancing. Yeah, what was that?
I think it was okay
Barn
by the time I
dancing.
was a
Barn
kid.
dancing.
But yeah, because you don't touch people too much.
My
Just their hands.
My
You don't like.
great-grandfather's a Wesleyan Methodist pastor, and I was
Yeah.
a Methodist
Yeah.
till I was 16.
So there's that term, the Wesleyan Methodists.
Yeah.
Well, what?
Right.
Yeah, that's because of this. The Methodist, the bulk of the Methodist Church joined
Right.
in together in
That makes
with
sense.
the Presbyterian Church, which is a Scottish Reformed Church, Calvinist Church, and a Congregationalist, the Congregationalist Church, which is a descendant of, related to the Puritans, and it goes back a long way. It's a response to the oppression of the Anglican Church in England, and it's a bit like a Baptist church, but it's not a Baptist church. It's quite different. They joined together, which is such a weird mix. An Arminian, a bunch of Arminian pietists with some Scottish Reformed people and Congregationalists.
You
That's
know,
not
very
all
weird.
the Scottish Reformed joined. A lot of
No,
the Wesleys didn't.
so a lot of the Presbyterian,
Oh,
not a lot, but a big
We're
chunk of the
recognizable
Presbyterian
service.
church stayed Presbyterian.
Mm.
A small part of the Methodist church stayed Methodist, and that's the Wesleyan Methodists.
Yeah.
There's not.
The Wesleyan
There's,
Methodist was a long time before that, though.
well, I mean, all Methodists are Wesleyan, really.
Yeah.
But I still see the Wesleyan churches
He started
today
the church.
as a Wesleyan church.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have heard that one or two Congregationalist churches didn't join the
That's
union
true.
as
There were
well.
some in South Australia that didn't join.
Yeah.
But there weren't many in the first place, so it actually created more denominations because it just added one more to them. This
Yeah,
union,
because not everybody joined in, does it?
yeah,
And now we create another one because it's about to break up.
yeah. So that was part of my growing up from when I was 10 to actually right up until I went to Japan. So because I all through my childhood I attended the Uniting Church, and through university I attended the Uniting Church. I actually stayed in the Uniting Church's Queensland College in Auchenflower in Brisbane. Went to Toowong Uniting, and that's where I started going into church leadership on the property committee. I don't know why you go into the property committee.
Is that when you did the reality bites thing?
No.
Not yet.
I didn't even know about worldviews. At this stage, you had to be pretty radical. You basically had to go to Switzerland to learn about Christian worldviews, I think, at this time. Because this is when Francis Schaeffer was... he was still in, what is it, La Prix or La...
Yeah, that's up until
whatever.
children. Yeah.
So I was just using people's materials and teaching Sunday school under other people. So I was just a humble servant at this stage, just a kid. And then I went to Tokyo, and there weren't any Methodist churches or Uniting churches in Tokyo, and there was, I think, a Lutheran church that I tried, but it was really boring. So I ended up going to a Southern Baptist church, Tokyo Baptist Church. And there I taught Sunday school, I ran youth, and I started developing materials for youth there. I ran a small group. I was on the outreach committee, and I can't remember a few other things. So I was involved, but I wasn't an elder or anything because I wasn't Southern Baptist. Then during that time, I spent a couple of periods of 6 months in the US, and I went to a variety of Californian churches, including a mega church. I don't even know what denomination it was, just a mega church. Yeah, in Silicon Valley. It was in Los Gatos, the mega church that I went to. And a Baptist church in Santa Cruz, which I enjoyed a bit more than the mega church. Then when I came back here, I went to Burleigh Uniting, where my brother's father-in-law was the minister, and I was an elder there and a youth leader. They didn't have many youth, so that was a pretty easy job. Then I joined Rabina Christian Family, which became GCCF and then Mosaic. And you know what I was there. And for 3.5 years in between, in the middle of that, I went to Hong Kong and went to ECC, which is an offshoot of it's actually an offshoot of an alliance church, but it's a non-denominational church.
That's Pete's denomination.
Related, yeah. So very missional, evangelical sort of church, and elder-led.
Okay.
So I was an elder there, which actually is so weird compared to here because everyone calls you elder, like Elder Malcolm. Natalia liked that because she was Elder Malcolm's daughter.
Better than older Malcolm.
Yeah. So that's so you can see from my background, I've been through a bit of a array of denominations. Just even without moving denomination, I went through a bunch.
Was 2019?
That's now. Yep.
That's what was right.
And what are we? We're
Congregational and Baptist in theology.
Yep.
Aren't we?
So we're actually a lot like ECC, except we're not elder-led. I guess we are.
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully we become a little bit pietist.
Pietistic.
That
Yeah.
word.
Plastic.
Yeah.
Pietistic.
Definitely.
Honestly, there's got to be advantages with
Plastic.
a depth of experience.
Not pious, but
You know, if someone's
getting us
sitting in
going
the
out
same
Oh, okay, right. Yeah.
building, worshipping their whole life, it doesn't really give them much of perspective of what's going on in the other parts of the body of Christ.
Yeah.
Does it?
I do value the experience that I've had, and Graham's been through a number of denominations as well, and I think that gives us a broader view than we might have otherwise, and it allows us to be more open and welcoming. We know what is really important. It gives us and we'll see this through the history of the church. It gives you a better idea of what's important and what's not. And knowing the history of the church helps as well. So, my theological background. So, in terms of church, it's the ones that I talked about. And in terms of study, I spent, I grew up in the Methodist Church, which has a focus on Bible study, personal Bible study, and I grew up using Methodist stuff, but mostly Scripture Union-y sort of stuff.
Yep.
And then when I discovered Christian worldview, I did informal studies on that, including going to a conference and stuff like that with Summit Ministries, which is an American ministry. And then I got to a point where I realized I needed to do formal study, and I went to Biola, which is non-denominational, but very evangelical. It's actually the center, you could say it's the founding institution of the evangelical church in a way, because R.A. Torrey, who wrote the Fundamentals, which created fundamentalism, which evolved, it split into what is modern fundamentalism, which is rejecting society, and evangelicalism, and Biola was on the evangelical direction. R.A. Torrey was a Biola faculty. So Biola has really been at the core of the evangelical movement since its inception 100 plus years ago.
I imagine you're going to define evangelicalism shortly.
Yeah. So I may as well do it now. Evangelicalism is a very modern phenomenon in when you use it that way. So evangelicalism grew out of something called fundamentalism, which was actually what I was just talking about, figuring out what are the fundamentals of the faith, right? What is important? Does it really mean to be a Christian? And we'll see that the church has been doing this for 2,000 years. Fundamentalism was a project to grapple with what science had changed about people's worldview, and to say, okay, in the light of the modern world, at the beginning of the 20th century this was, what are the fundamentals of the church? Have they changed? How do we engage with the surrounding culture? How do we actually represent the supernatural realities of our faith in a materialistic world? That's what fundamentalism was to start with. And then after World War II, it went through a crisis, and some parts of fundamentalism said, no, society is so corrupt, we've got to pull away from it. and they took the name with them, and that's what we think nowadays of as fundamentalists. When somebody says you're a fundamentalist, they mean somebody who rejects society, who's this sort of, you know, weird woods dwelling person, maybe with a bunker or something, or somebody who's
Is that a bit
really,
extreme, though?
or somebody who's really intolerant of other people.
So you could say an environmentalist is like that when they chain themselves to the tree.
Glue themselves
Glue
themselves to the road crossing.
Lose
So sorry,
themselves
this
to the road.
is
yeah.
a bit of an interlude, but wasn't that funny? The two guys in
Yeah.
Brisbane
Don't
who
they,
No.
glued
don't they know
themselves
they
to the
just got to
road
put boiling
Not very
water on
funny.
it?
because of an
Yeah.
extinction crisis that's coming. It's almost a religion, isn't it?
Yeah.
They had me laughing that
I
they
didn't hear
do
about that.
Yeah, they had to use very strong chemicals to
To
dilute
get
the
them
glue
off.
to get them off the road.
It took
They
years.
glued their
No, you
skin,
don't.
They
Hot
glued
water.
themselves literally to
not
the
their
road.
clothes themselves.
I think it was themselves, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
but
Stop
they-
traffic.
Yeah,
It's
because we've
They're
had kids gluing themselves
protesting
to
the
concrete.
ammonia line.
Concrete just got to have boiling
Yeah.
water.
Could
Could you get the concrete up there and get your road up?
Oh my
I'll be
goodness.
here getting the road home because we
But
do.
wouldn't it be worse for the environment because the cars are just
I
sitting
thought
there
the same
waiting?
thing.
Yeah, that was
one,
mentioned on the
Sorry, Malcolm.
And so evangelicalism was the other branch of that said we still, our role as Christians is to engage with the world, it's to reach the world, but we can't abandon our beliefs, so we need to continue this project of figuring out how we can engage with the world from our core conservative beliefs of the gospel and the supernatural realities of Christ, the inerrancy of Scripture, etc., etc. So evangelicalism grew out of that, and Christianity today is actually the sort of the masthead of the evangelical movement. It was started as a way to communicate that, and Billy Graham, of course, was influential in the evangelical movement, and he's sort of the famous preacher of the evangelical movement. But evangelicalism is a cross-denominational movement. So there's a whole range of churches that class themselves as evangelical, from Baptists like Southern Baptists or Australian Baptists to Methodist churches to even a lot of Anglicans, for example. The Sydney Anglican Diocese is evangelical.
So,
Yeah.
so what's happened with the denominations is all the Protestant denominations, where they were like, you considered yourself Baptist, Anglican, Wesleyan, Methodist, 2 generations ago, what's
Well, that's-
happened is now people consider themselves evangelical
Yeah.
or liberal.
Yeah.
And evangelical really is really now defined by the idea that Jesus died and rose from the dead physically, and the Bible
right.
is God's true word. And if you fit that category, you're heading to evangelical Christianity. And if you think the resurrection wasn't physical, it's a metaphorical idea, and all religions lead to God, and the Bible is just one of the holy texts, then that's liberal Christianity. And a lot of Protestant churches have gone down that direction.
Really?
Yeah.
And then a lot has
Scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's really scary.
So evangelicalism
Yeah.
says
Well,
evangelicalism
It's a
says
salvation issue.
we've got
Isn't
no,
it?
well
It's
all
a
of
big
a
issue,
lot of
that's
what
an
we're
issue. Yeah.
talking
So
about.
we've got to be careful.
You'll see that this is a big issue in church history.
But it's so hard too now when you go to somewhere new, because the churches don't say Anglican, Baptist,
Yep.
whatever. You've got to go. You've got to risk it when you go to some
Well,
of these
it's
churches.
because
You're
Anglican
gonna
and
listen to
Baptist
preaching
doesn't
and
mean as much
But
as it
before
used to.
you walk in, you can always look. Almost all churches got a web page or a Facebook
Yeah,
page.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
you
they'll
can
give
see
their
what
mission
Yeah,
matters.
that's right. You've
They'll
got to
give
look.
their beliefs.
Look at the
statement.
Narang
Yeah.
Baptist
Talk to the
Church's
pastor.
webpage.
Talk
The
to
They
the
say
pastor.
they're
King James.
non-evangelical.
Evangelical.
That's it.
Yeah, well, actually, coming
They're
from
not
Sydney
evangelical.
Anglican, as a child, it was interesting when I came. I actually, and me not really being a church kid, we were sent to Sunday school, but I kind of involved a little bit with the
That was
youth
to get
group.
rid of you for a few
I know
months.
that, but I also did a little bit of youth group in my first year of high school. When I came to Queensland, I recognised that the Anglican Church was very different to what I had in Sydney.
Yeah.
Anglican Church in Chinchilla.
Oh.
Anglican Church in country Queensland was very different to
Yeah.
anything like I've
What's
seen
really-
in Sydney.
Don't get me started on the difference between Baptist churches in North America.
Oh,
and
we can understand. We can understand.
Which
Okay, I'll
Baptist
let you
church?
carry
But
on.
what's really interesting,
Which of the 200 denominations of Baptist in America are you
that's
talking
right.
but what's
about?
really interesting with that evangelical liberal divide is a lot of churches, the congregation might be quite evangelical and believe that Jesus died and rose again, and they read the Bible and trust the Bible, and then they get a minister hoisted on them that doesn't believe any of that,
Yeah.
and that happens particularly in the Anglican Uniting Church.
Mm.
Oh,
So
It's
it's,
been suddenly have lots of people leaving because
yeah.
they get a new minister
I
put
don't
onto them. And
understand.
We sold the church after that.
Isn't that a cult?
It's interesting.
No,
isn't it?
really?
Yeah.
No, can you just reiterate what they don't believe that Jesus died and rose again? Is that right?
There's-
physically resurrected.
Necessarily. Some way,
Yeah,
some way.
there's a continuum
Yeah.
of belief, right? And so you can't really tell what a particular church believes unless you talk to enough of the church and the right people in the church. Like Graham said, the leaders can be different from the congregation. So, and there is a continuum of belief. I think it's let's go through
Let's
the
start
stuff that I've got, because we explore this continuum of belief, because the church has mapped this out.
Sorry, quickly, Wendy. It wouldn't really be considered a cult. It would more be like, I wouldn't even call it Christianity. They're not really believing in one of like the
Yeah.
Well, it's like I
It's a
I
heresy,
get it
that's for
confused.
sure.
Okay, good enough.